Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today we're going to talk about intonating your guitar. And this also will apply to like basses and any other instrument that has a string and an adjustable bridge. So, anyway, we're going to be covering both electrics and acoustic instruments today, and we're going to start off with electrics, and perhaps the first question we should answer is, what is intonation? Well, intonation quite simply is when you play the open string on your guitar or other instrument, and then fret at the 12th fret, those two notes should be exactly the same pitch. If they are not, if this note on the 12th fret is sharp or flat, then everything that you're playing, even like starting probably around the 4th or 5th fret, is going to be slightly out of tune, and you'll really notice that when you're playing chords. If you have an instrument where you're like just playing a basic power chord, and it just doesn't sound right around the 5th fret or 7th fret or above, you could have intonation issues. And you know, most guitars off the shelf or that you order will have the intonation pretty close. But I always advise people that it's one of the first things that you do with a new instrument that you acquire, be it used or brand new, is that you check the intonation. All right, so how do we go about doing this? It's really quite simple. But there are a couple things you need to think about before you check the intonation. One is to make sure that your nut slots are cut deep enough. If the strings are riding really high above the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd frets, your nut slots are not cut deep enough. And what that means is that when you fret these particular notes, you're actually bending them sharp. So that can be a huge issue. So first you want to check your nut, make sure that your slots are looking pretty good, you know, just not overly high, so that when you press down, you're actually bending the note out of tune. The other thing to check is to make sure that your action is set the way that you are going to be playing the guitar. I keep my action very low on my instruments. If your action is abnormally high, however, when you are fretting on your 12th fret to check your intonation, what you're going to find is once again, you're going to be bending that note out of pitch. And so you want to make sure that your action is reasonably low and that your nut is properly cut, so that, you know, when you go through this whole intonation process, you're getting an accurate read on what's happening to the string here on the 12th fret. All right, so you would go ahead and you could do this on a workbench. When I do this on a workbench, however, I leave the neck unsupported. With a Fender style instrument, I just rest the body and the neck rides over the top of the bench. On Gibson style instruments, I'll put a little wood block underneath the heel here to go ahead and prop it up so the neck is just kind of floating as I check this. It's kind of a little bit of voodoo, but in some cases people think that if you have the neck resting on a neck rest or something like that, that it can affect checking the intonation, and it's better to check it while the neck is floating as if you're playing. So anyway, that's what I do. If you prefer to have, a neck support underneath your neck, that's fine too. I'm not gonna get didactic about that. So anyway, what you do is I've got my tuner on here. I'm gonna check the low E, and it's in pitch, and then I'll check here on the 12th fret. And when you press your string on the 12th fret to start checking the intonation on all your strings, what you want to do is you don't want to press that super hard. You want to press that as if you were just fretting a normal note. Okay? And I'm checking, and my E is just a little bit sharp. So, when a note is sharp, that means on the 12th fret, that means that the string length between the saddle and the nut needs to increase. So what you would do is you would take a screwdriver and tighten this up by turning it clockwise to bring that bridge saddle back. We're not going to go through the full demonstration just yet because this is a Telecaster, one of the earliest forms of electric guitar that has two strings attached to one bridge saddle. So what I'm going to do now, since this bridge saddle is, these two strings are dependent upon it, each of them are, I'm going to check my A string now, and I'm going to see if it is intonated. And it's perfectly intonated. So on Telecaster or other like budget style Fender guitars of the past and some budget instruments to this day, you will find this system where you have a screw that has a bridge saddle on it that is adjustable, but it controls two strings at once. You can never quite get perfect intonation on both strings. You have to pick which one is the one that you want to go ahead and get intonated. I pick the A string, and I sit and I go like this, and I listen to just a root and a fifth, part of a power chord. And I find that if I have the A, the perfect 440A in pitch, intonated, that the E can be just a little bit off and it doesn't make a whole lot of difference to the ear. And so, anyway, that's just some of the things you have to look for with a Telecaster style bridge, or, like I said, where you have, two strings dependent upon one saddle. I do have, however, on this guitar, I have compensated bridge saddles. So you can buy these aftermarket. These are brass ones that I bought. And what it does is it increases the string length on the E more than it does on the A. And that is how you can kind of like compensate for the fact that both of them are relying upon each other. And so that way, because usually the E needs to be needs to be a longer distance between the bridge saddle and the nut to be properly intonated, and you need less distance for the A. So you can buy these and put them on your Telecaster style instrument, or like Duosonics and some other guitars have this style of system, and that way you can get a lot closer with your intonation. Let's just go over now. What if that had been flat? If it had been flat, then, conversely, you need to decrease the length of the string between your bridge saddle and your nut. To do so, you would loosen the adjustment screw back here by turning it counterclockwise. And I'm just going to be repeating a lot of this over and over again because, and I also have a little graphic that has probably already come up and will come up again, because it's important to keep this in your brain. If a note is sharp, you increase the string length, and if a note is flat at the 12th fret, you decrease the string length. All right, now let's go over to this, a Strat style guitar, and I'll grab my screwdriver here, and you would do the same thing. I'm not going to go through, the tuning and stuff like that, but what you would do, you go ahead and check, and then you have your adjustment screw here on the back of the bridge. I find that the majority of instruments that you're going to run across will have, that are Fender style or Fender, inspired, will have their adjustment screws in the back. And they're easy to get to. You just go like this and you tighten to increase the string length, and you loosen to decrease the string length. And that's how you get to your intonation adjustment, is just quite simply by accessing those screws on the back of your bridge or your vibrato system to make the adjustment. Now, things can get a little bit more fraught on tunematic style instruments. Your Les Pauls, SGs, Gibson inspired instruments, we'll call them. Because on a lot of instruments that are made overseas, the adjustment screws are going to be facing towards the headstock rather towards the back of the guitar. So when you're making adjustments on this style, on this particular guitar, the adjustment screws are facing towards the headstock, you will be loosening to increase string length and tightening to decrease string length. So, and that makes sense because it is reversed. So you just quite simply reverse the operation with the screwdriver to adjust the saddles on this type of instrument. Or if you're a fan of flipping these, you can just flip them around the other way, or and then take it completely apart and change your bridge saddle orientation on them. There's a whole, I should make a whole video just on different ways to set up a tune-o-matic. We're not going to cover all of that here, but before I digress into that whole thing, let's just keep it simple and talk about the fact that if your screws are facing that direction, then you tighten to decrease and you loosen to increase. It's the exact opposite of what we were doing on these other guitars. All right, so that would be how to adjust and get your intonation right on guitars that are fully functional. We're just pretending right now that these guitars, work as they should. They were properly built. The scale length is right. When you're at the 12th fret, that's actually right at the halfway point of the run of the string, which is the whole point of this. And I should also point out real quickly, when my finger's resting there, if you want to double check, you can also just do a 12th fret harmonic and see how that compares to both the fretted note and the open note. And if you've got all three of those pretty much dead on, you've got your intonation set. Okay. So what am I getting at by saying that these are properly functioning instruments? What I'm saying is that it was built right and things are where they're supposed to be. There are cases, and I had one of the viewers popped up on my short about intonation and left a great comment about the fact that, he ran into one of his instruments that, the bridge is in the wrong place. This happens. It happens a lot with Gibson style stuff, is sometimes that tune-o-matic will be in the wrong place and you will max out your string length. You tighten that screw all the way up, max it out completely to the edge of the bridge, and you got nowhere to go. And that's because the bridge has been improperly drilled and put literally in the wrong place. You can come across that on these Fender style vibrato systems as well. One fix is if you're just a little bit off, you can remove the screws here, or remove the screws that hold the bridge saddles, take the springs out, and you can just chop those in half with a pair of wire cutters and shorten the mechanical spring itself, because it's actually a mechanical barrier to moving that bridge back further if you need to. So if you shorten that spring, that's another way to solve the intonation issue without hopefully having to re-drill and reposition things. I have run across this. I have seen this more often on Gibson-inspired instruments, but every once in a while you'll hit, a guitar like a Tele or a Strat or whatever, and you can't get them intonated. And it's usually because, you can bring things forward. That's easy. If you've got, if you're flat and you need to decrease the string length, that's usually not the issue. If you're going sharp and you need to increase string length, you will reach a theoretical barrier. And in those cases, it becomes an extreme solution. If you have purchased a guitar and you go through the procedures that I've been detailing here, and you find that no matter what you do, you cannot get the, proper string length because you're maxed out, return that instrument. I don't care if it's used. I don't care how expensive it is. I don't care what they tell you. But if the guitar cannot be properly intonated, it was not built properly. And there's no reason why you should have to suffer through that and have to put wood inserts in or just, relocate a bridge completely. Unless it is a beloved vintage instrument or something that is just like a one of a kind, you can't get anything else, then you would go through that kind of repair work to actually reposition the bridge. But if you have bought something from a store or on Reverb or, Craigslist, wherever you're getting your instruments, and it does not intonate, you should not keep that guitar. You should give it back and get your money back. And there's no reason why a seller, should balk at that. I mean, the guitar quite simply does not work as it should. All right, so that's enough about electrics. We're going to come right back and we're going to talk about acoustic guitars and the, it's a tough world in acoustic land when it comes to intonation sometimes, and we're going to be covering all of that next. Intonating acoustic guitars. This can be a difficult proposition. With acoustic guitars, you're dealing with a bridge that is glued to the top of a, very thin piece of wood, which is your soundboard. This is not moving. You have a saddle that is usually just a single solid piece of material, and it is positioned where it is positioned when the guitar is built. So when you get the guitar, and if you get it home and you start checking the intonation and you discover that things are off or off by quite a bit, that can be an issue. I strongly advise when you are purchasing an acoustic instrument of any sort that you do check the intonation as part of your buying checklist. If the intonation is off by a fair amount, I would stay away from that instrument, because we'll be getting into what you have to do to correct that here in a few minutes. But it's pretty straightforward. Most of the time, an acoustic guitar that is well built and spec'd out properly, you shouldn't have any issues with the intonation. They will have some inconsistencies, and most of the time those are things you can live with. If you're a player, though, who likes to do those kind of things like I do, I like to go up and play that octave D chord or an octave G chord, just all the way up past that 12th fret. I need my intonation to be as close as it can be. So what can you do? If you have a bridge saddle that is just a straight piece without any sort of compensation on it, and I'm going to put up a detailed picture of what a compensated bridge looks like. Bridge saddle, I should say. This is one right here. And what you can do is you can purchase one of these, and it has the line where the strings cross to go up to the nut. The line where the strings pass over the bridge saddle is going to go back and forth. Like we've got our E string is forward, our B string is a little bit back where the string contacts and goes over. Then we've got a contact point that's much further back at the low E, and then gradually tapers out for your A and D and G strings. That is what a compensated bridge for acoustic guitar is. You don't have to buy one. You can take a file like I did to this one and some sandpaper, and you can scoot back your low E, bring forward your high E, just by removing material on either side of the ends, of the width of the bridge saddle. You can, bring back that string point by sanding away at the front. You can sand away at the back to bring it forward, and that way you can get as close to perfect intonation as possible. Now, that is, most in most good quality acoustic guitars these days have a compensated bridge saddle on them. Older guitars, not so much, especially budget instruments. So, you can just buy the off-the-shelf compensated bridge saddle, fit it to your guitar, throw it in there, and be happy. Or you can do it yourself. You can also manipulate those a little bit further if you do have an intonation issue that's a little bit of an outlier. And speaking of outliers, okay, we mentioned this a little bit with electrics. If things are just in the wrong place, once again, intonation cannot be attainable. In some cases, on an acoustic instrument, you have a few options, and I'm going to go over them real briefly. This video is already really long, but I want this to be a comprehensive video about both types of instruments as far as getting them properly intonated, because I really do believe that intonation is one of the most important things to having a healthy, beautiful instrument that you can play without any worries and with complete enjoyment. All right, if the bridge saddle, no matter how much you compensate it, does not work, there's two options. You can remove it, fill in the slot with like material. This is an ebony bridge that I made myself. I would fill that with a piece of ebony, sand it all out, and then recut the saddle slot, moving it either forwards or backwards, depending upon the intonation issues. That is not completely crazy repair, but it's not something you want to get into unless you have to. But that is one solution. Another solution, if things are really bad, you can steam off the entire bridge and relocate it. If you don't feel like, relocating that, it's basically, pick your poison. You can go through the hassle of having to route out a new saddle slot, or you can just move the whole bridge. And speaking of moving whole bridges, I wanted to quickly move over to this guitar. Now, this is a classical guitar, a nylon string guitar, and with these, you're kind of really stuck. You can't, filling in the bridge saddle on the bridge itself and then cutting a new slot is kind of impossible on this style of bridge on an acoustic guitar. So you have to relocate the entire bridge. If you notice, you'll see some light spots around here. I had to remove this bridge, move it backwards and down a little bit to get the strings in alignment and to get it properly intonated. This is a very old instrument. It was totally worth doing because it's a beloved vintage instrument. So that is another option. This is an example of where I have done that to get the intonation right, so that when I'm up here, things are in tune. That wasn't the greatest playing in the world, but that's not what we're here to do. We're here to talk about intonation. But anyway, that's the other solution, is you just have to move the whole bridge. And like I said, if you have purchased an instrument, no matter where you've gotten it, and these things are just not happening. You've tried the basics like a compensated bridge, but if you're getting into having to fill the saddle slot or relocate the bridge altogether, avoid. You don't want that hassle. And like I said, the only reason that I do these things is because on these old Gibsons, things move around over the years, and these are like my primary guitars. I've had this for like 37 years, so I'm not going to get rid of this. I'm going to fix it. And but if I just bought it like a year ago, or if I bought it a week ago or a month ago or whatever, and I got it home and I found that I had those issues, I would send it right back. No questions asked. I'd be like, I need my money back. And you cannot say anything to me saying that that guitar is worth owning. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I know that it turned out much longer than I expected, but I did want to cover, try to make this video as comprehensive as possible for people who are dealing with intonation on their instruments. Like I said, I think it's super important. So please hit like and subscribe. Shares are greatly appreciated, and leave any advice that you have in the comments, anything that I may have overlooked, or anything that you may do differently. There's a lot of different ways to go about doing these things, but the basic mechanics of it is your strings got to be the right length to get the right note at the 12th fret. All right, you take care, hit subscribe, and we'll see you next time.